Thanks, everybody. My name is David Schropfer. Thanks for the introduction, Ian. And before we get started, I'd love to give Marla and Ian a big round of applause, and Gary too. They've done an excellent job putting this event together. So thanks very much for all your work. I know that most of you have probably talked to them in one way or another. Before we get going, I'd like to get an understanding of who is in the room in terms of industries. What industries do you cover? Do we have any people here, for example, from the banking industry? Any bankers, investment bankers? Okay, we got a few. How about retailers? Any merchants? Big box, small box, mom and pop, anything? Okay. Let's see, what else? How about payment processing, the Fiservs and the First Datas of the world? Okay, see the gentleman in the back there, thank you. Anybody else? How about strict mobile commerce products, like a loyalty program or a coupon program, something along those lines? Nobody in the room is actually in mobile commerce with the mobile commerce product, okay. But we had a couple. Good. Anybody else? Any analysts or media? Do we have somebody from the media? Analysts, investors? Okay, good. Good. Here's just a little bit about me. Like Ian said, I'm the head of mobile commerce and a partner at the Luciano Group. I built one of the first mobile virtual network operations way back before we even called them that. I also built one of the first software as a service businesses. We called it ASP back then, and of course we all refer to it as cloud computing today. I also built one of the largest telecom networks with incumbent telecom companies all over the world. We put 90 of those together in about just 18 months, and today I'm working exclusively in mobile commerce, building and executing some of the most interesting mobile commerce projects around the world. And the philosophy that I use almost every time is simple. Start with the analytics, because that tells you where the opportunity is. From there, you figure out the strategy, how do you make money off of that opportunity, and then the fun part, of course, is execution and making money. What I'm here to talk to you about today is the analytics that we've learned along the way. Nothing proprietary, nothing that my clients own, but what do the analytics tell us about where this industry is going and what the insights are? First, let's define it. Mobile commerce. It's about acquisition, it's about conversion, it's about payments. So, there we go. So on the acquisition side, a mobile commerce product is something that will bring you into the store, right? Just like a coupon you get in the mail, gets you to get out off your sofa and get into the store because you've received something that you didn't have before. Conversion, that's when you are either in the store or you have some loyalty to the store itself. So when you go out to buy a toaster, you go to one retailer versus another retailer to go buy it. And of course, in terms of transactions, that's getting paid. The merchant's collecting money, and you are giving the merchant money in exchange for their goods and their services. Now, these are some examples of things that exist today or some things that are about to exist soon. Things like the wallet tender steering is a hotly debated topic. The idea that the merchant can tell you what payment type they want you to use by virtue of the discount that they're going to give you for using it. So here are the industries that are effective. When you look at a new business model of any kind, you've got to figure out, well, if you're going to take market share, you're either going to create new customers or you're going to motivate customers in an existing industry to do something slightly different. Okay? So when we look at that, these are the buckets. Now, from a retailer's point of view, payments is nothing but a cost, right? Every retailer wants to do one thing regarding accepting payments. They know they have to take them. They're not going to be in business if they don't accept Visa, MasterCard, and other payment products. So all they want to do is make it cost as little as possible. Same with loyalty programs. These programs can be expensive. Every one of those cards you carry around in your pocket, some of them cost the retailers $2 per user per month. That's a lot. That really adds up. So that retailer has to make at least $2 in profit off of you by virtue of you carrying that card around to make them just to break even. And then any profit they make on top of that is, well, that's the advantage of the product itself. Advertising is a little bit different. Co-op dollars make it a lot easier for merchants to recoup some of that money. So they do an advertisement that costs them $10,000, and then the sum of the money that they collect from all the products that they purchased and advertised in their retail advertisement are recouped from the company that made the product. So in other words, if Walmart advertises a toaster, the manufacturer of that toaster is paying them a little bit for that spot in their ad. So when you add it all up, That can either be a profit center for them, but more likely they just try to break even on the advertising. But that's money coming in and not just money going out, and that's an important distinction. So here is my view of the world, if you will, pardon me, on the levers of mobile commerce. You don't do these things and you die. Reducing cost, driving sales, and of course managing security and accuracy. These are all pretty intuitive, right? So we're going to talk, I'm sure, during the course of the show about customer adoption. We're going to talk about retail pushing these types of products or making these products offered at their stores or accepted at their stores. We're going to talk about the technology that's going to get into people's hands. But all those things fall into one of these buckets, right? If it's not, if a mobile commerce product doesn't reduce costs for the merchant in some way, shape, or form, they have less of a reason or no reason to make it available to their customers. If it doesn't drive sales, they have less of a reason or no reason at all to offer it to their customers. If you're not doing these things as a mobile commerce company, you're going to die. So that's what we're focusing on today. These are the core of the insights. To talk about how you save money or how you drive costs down with something like mobile commerce, we have to look at where the costs are coming from, right? So we've all heard of or most of you have heard of the four-party system. Has anybody heard of the four-party system? Is that a term that's familiar to the folks in this room? Okay. This is it. These are the four parties. A customer, a merchant, and they both have a bank account. Now, in the old days, of course, there was cash or some currency or some trade that was happening in exchange for the goods and services. Payments is the idea that money moves from the customer's account to the merchant's account without anybody moving cash around. That's all. Those are the four parties. That's what we're trying to do with payments. So Bank of America, as many of you know, way back when, decided, hey, I've got an idea. I've got all these merchants that have an account with me. I've got their bank accounts in my, within their deposits. I've got a bunch of customers that want to buy from those merchants. So why don't I create a product, a credit card of some kind, where I can collect all the money from all the merchants, add it up, and give it to all the merchants that have an account with Bank of America at the end of every day. Beautiful project, beautiful, beautiful product. And then they took it one step further and said, okay, well, what if I have a merchant that doesn't have an account with me? That's okay too. We can add up all the money from all of our customers that have accounts at somebody else's bank, and we'll take that big bucket of money and we will wire it through the secure channels that banks have had since the beginning of time. We'll wire that money to another bank and say, okay, here's a big bucket of money. You distribute it between all of your merchants because that's what our customers owe them today. It was all fine and good, and Bank of America was extremely happy with this model, and you can see why. They're the masters of this model. They're the sole. They put themselves at the center of the model, but it broke down. Now, why did it break down? Because every bank wanted to issue their own credit cards. So now, instead of one bank settling with all banks, they had all banks settling with all banks. And before this even got off the ground, people realized that this was not going to be scalable, right? Anybody know how many banks and credit unions are in the United States today? I'm sorry? That's about right. That's about right. It's somewhere between 8,000 and 15,000, depending on how you define it. But between the national associations and the credit unions, it's a lot. It's thousands and thousands of these things. So to think of those thousands settling with all the other thousands and trying to figure out who owes what at the end of the day without something in between wasn't tenable. So they came up with a scheme. And that scheme was Visa, MasterCard setting a set of rules. Obviously, Bank of America became Visa. Their Bank of America's competition came out with their own product, which was called MasterCard. And then both banks said, you know what, we're not going to own these things. We're going to spin them off and make them nonprofits of all things, which is how Visa and MasterCard actually started as nonprofit organizations. And they were only responsible for the rules and doing the math and figuring out what bank owes what to whom and settling up at the end of every day. But of course, it doesn't quite work that way. It works more like this way. Visa, MasterCard don't touch money. That's not their job. Their job is information, not money. They send information to a settlement bank, and the settlement bank, like any other bank, is the entity that's allowed to touch the money itself, right? So the settlement bank is moving the money back and forth, and the banks even said at some point, you know, we don't even want to be the issuing process. We don't want to run these big computers, right? If you go to Omaha, you will see cow field-sized buildings, many of them that are filled to the brim with computers and servers, very, very secure computers and servers, by the way, that handle all these transactions. That's how it evolved. I'm talking about First Data and some of the other companies. These are massive data centers that are responsible for making all of this work, right? So they spun off that business too over time, and that became another part of this ecosystem. So the specialization sort of settled out and it looked more or less like this. And it's done pretty well, as we all know. 63% of every transaction of the roughly $5.5 trillion that are going to change hands in the United States this year, about 63% of that is going to go through a prepaid card or a credit card or a debit card in the United States. That's a lot. The green line, by the way, is very, very interesting to me. That's cash. So despite this onslaught of a new market entrant since, in the last couple of decades, really, cash has remained pretty steady. I wanted to point that out because we're going to get back to that later, because that is a bunch of customers and a bunch of transactions that could mean a lot of money and a lot of revenue in the near future. So for 50 years, since the early 60s, this architecture has been in place. It's changed. Technology's changed. This thing called Internet Protocol came along, and we all started using that, and the POS devices started running off of that as opposed to dial-up modems. And those books went away. If some of you are looking around the room as at least as old as I am, and you remember those flimsy little books that every retailer had where they looked up your credit card number every single time, that got changed as technology changed. But the system, the structure, the architecture remained the same. But it hasn't been without its share of pressure. This is an incredibly pressurized model today. Obviously, Amex and Discover, let's start there. They wanted banks to issue their cards too. And that was, as most of you know, a very large class action lawsuit that was recently settled. So now, banks issue American Express cards. Banks issue Discover cards. Similarly, you've heard of some regulation that has come up recently, Card Act, the Durbin Amendment. These are things that affect the profit models of the banks that have been issuing these cards all this time. The acquiring processors, the issuing processors, some of which, by the way, are the same companies. They do both jobs, but there's still specialized functions within those companies. They've been under tremendous pressure. New entrants, the technology costs, running these massive incumbent legacy systems, not cheap, not easy. And of course, merchants all along have been saying, we want lower fees. What you're doing is really not that hard. We want lower fees. We're buying the stuff and selling it, and we're trying to make a margin. We don't want to pay your fees as high. And that's a constant negotiation for the last 50 years between the merchants and the suppliers of these services, whether it's an ISO or they're dealing direct. I want my fees lower. So all that pressure is going to lead to one thing, depressurization, I like to call it. This model isn't going to collapse probably, even in our lifetimes. This will probably exist for a very long time. But the pressure that's being put on it is about to change it dramatically over the next few years. How dramatically? Probably not this dramatically, but this is a great example. This is another industry that was experiencing very similar kinds of pressures. It had technology pressure. It had market pressure. It had regulatory pressure. And the net result is a unit that they were selling for $60, $60, is now being sold today for about 10 cents. I don't know that anybody can read the microprint up there, but does anybody know what this industry is? So long distance, international long distance minute, the ILD market. Now, most industries don't get to still survive after something like that. $60 to 10 cents, I mean, how do you come back from that? What possible margin could you have in place after that? Well, you throw away your legacy systems and you fire a bunch of people and you try to do with one server what you did with a room full of servers in the past, and your service gets a little worse. And these are all changes that metamorphosize this market. The payments model that we just looked at is under all of these same pressures. They've got their regulatory pressures, they've got their technology pressures, certainly, and they obviously have technology pressures as well. So the three of those pressures combined are going to lead to something. Is it going to be that dramatic? I don't think so, but here are some examples of what that pressure looks like and why it's going to break it apart in some way. Let's look at the Home Depot. Very recently, they started accepting PayPal as a form of payment. So instead of a merchant, a ubiquitous merchant, I'm going to put them as a particular merchant as an example. Now, in the past, their POS device did one thing. In the past, now I'm talking 10 years ago or more. But POS devices used to do one thing only. They would talk to the computer of the acquiring processor, or the sales company, the independent sales organization that sort of fit in between. But it did that one thing. It was its only job. Is this credit card good? Can I find a promise to pay from this credit card for the merchandise that I'm about to give this customer? That was the only job. But eventually, they started connecting POS devices to the internet. Made sense. You know, for one, they wanted to use IP protocol because it's cheaper and ubiquitous and everybody has it. And it's also able to run loyalty programs and you can start to tie your POS devices into those. Okay, great. But there's something else there in the cloud, and that's called PayPal. So when you walk into a Home Depot store, and I did this actually, you can give your telephone number, a PIN that you've set up with PayPal. And what's happening is, instead of the money flowing through this whole 50-year-old system that we've been talking about and all the servers and computers associated with it, it goes into the cloud and into PayPal. And PayPal, remember, the merchant wants one thing, a solid promise to get paid for the stuff that they're giving the customer leaving their store. That's all they want. They have that promise and they trust that promise, they're done. They'll give you the merchandise and you can leave. So PayPal's promise to pay is just like anyone. Has anybody here used PayPal for anything whatsoever? Okay, most of you. I'd say that's about 3/4 of the room. As soon as you process the transaction, you can basically see it right there in your account, right? And the money is there for you to use almost instantly because PayPal's already received that money and put it into their bank account. So they know they're good for it. So Home Depot can take money out of PayPal every day, every hour, once a year. It doesn't matter. They can do it as often as they like, and they can see it immediately as soon as that transaction happens. And likewise, the customer can fund their PayPal account anytime they like. Interestingly, the rails, if you will, that are moving the money from the bank to PayPal are exactly the same as the bank-to-bank transfers because they're not going to PayPal. The money is going to PayPal's bank, not directly to PayPal. PayPal is a database, everybody, and I think most of the people here know that. They don't move money around. When I send you $5 through PayPal, no money has changed hands in that transaction. Numbers have changed hands. So it's inherently cheaper, much cheaper, to move numbers around on effectively a big database than it is to move money around in every single transaction. That's the brilliance of this. So any way you look at it, this cost has to be cheaper. It absolutely, positively has to be cheaper because all of those other parties go away. And by the way, the banks don't make a dime on this transaction. Most of the interchange in using a credit card for this exact same purchase, a lot of that money goes to the banks. In this scenario, none of it goes to the banks. It's pretty interesting. So you've got PayPal keeping all the money, not really having to share a lot of it with the bank. You've got a much cheaper function that they're trying to accomplish within their system. So why does it cost the same? The answer is it doesn't, or it shouldn't. Actually, PayPal is charging just about the same interchange rates as MasterCard and Visa charge today. But given the cost basis and my analysis of this cost basis, it can't possibly cost PayPal as much to transmit that same transaction. So that tells me that PayPal has the ability to dramatically cut their fees. Dramatically cut their fees. Have they done it yet? No. But if I were them, I would do exactly what they're doing. Get a big box retailer, prove that the model works, prove that some people use it, and I'm not sure that they've identified a way to completely resolve that yet, but they're working on it. And then they cut their rates and all the retailers come. Because, back on one of our first slides, what do retailers want to do regarding payments? Cut the cost. So if PayPal can deliver that, then that's what's going to happen. I should also mention that I put alternate payment schemes. PayPal is not alone in this space, obviously, and if PayPal doesn't lower the rates, well, somebody else will. They're the most popular. They're the ones we know best. There are other products out there. Boku doesn't work anything like this. It's really working off of the carriers, but the idea is the same. It circumvents the rest of that scenario. It circumvents all the other players, the incumbent players, the legacy players that have been making money off of this industry for the last 50 years. Another thing that's putting pressure on this structure is the good old-fashioned command response between two computers, right? First day of every computer class you attended in high school, and I'm sure that everybody in this room attended a computer class in high school. One of the very first things your professor or high school teacher told you is that a computer is about command response. One computer tells the other computer to do a thing, or it tells itself to do a thing, and then it responds to that thing. And that's all it is, repeating that over and over and making that more and more complex, but each individual task is essentially that thing happening. Now, we've never had a way for a two-way dialogue, a command response scenario, to happen between a customer standing at a cash register and the cash register. The closest we come is the cashier saying, please swipe your card, sir. Okay, that's a command, and then you swipe your card, and that's the response. And then the data that's on your card is what's getting transmitted to your, to the computer. But now, we can do that. So let's say we're using NFC, and I've got an NFC phone, and I'm standing in front of a cash register that accepts NFC. Now, I'm not saying that this is happening today, but this is what's capable of happening. The POS device can say, hey, I speak NFC too, and the smartphone can ask another question and another question and another question, and there can be security protocols, and all that can happen about 800 times faster than I just showed you here. So think about the power of that. Security protocols are built on command response, like EMV, for example. All of your payment products or your coupons and loyalty programs can all be tied in there, and your computer can be doing that thinking for you. You've got a $20 coupon sitting in your pocket and you forget about it, it has no value. You've got a $20 coupon in your smartphone remembers for you because it's asking the POS device along the way. So that's why the command response dialog is the critical piece of this. Compare that to a mag stripe. You've got a credit card that has a set of data. And the POS device takes that data. And then it does something with it or it doesn't if it doesn't accept that card. But that's it. It's one data set that moves one time, and that's all you can do with it. Okay, great for payments, and we figured out a way to make payments very, very stable based on this, but obviously the power is remarkably different than a two-way command response dialog. So what are our options when it comes to this command response dialog happening real time between a consumer and a retailer standing at a cash register? Well, there are QR codes. This is an interesting idea, and I'm a big fan of these. I think in the short term, these have a lot of potential. A QR code can make anything happen. So if it can launch an app, most of them take you to a website, a specific page of a website today, and that website can start a dialogue or it can give the user a number of different options and things to do. I think they're very cool. It's got some limitations because the QR code in and of itself is really triggering one event to happen. And whatever happens after that is either going to take programming or whatever else, but it's easy. To deploy this is nothing, right? As fast as you can print them out or display them on a high definition monitor, you can deploy them to your customers. So it's got a lot of advantages. Bluetooth isn't going to work. Most of the reason is because it's got a 30-foot radius, more or less. So next time you're in Walmart, standing there with your phone, imagine draw a circle around yourself 30 feet in every direction and see how many other smartphones are within that 30 feet and see how many cash registers are within that 30 feet. You don't want your phone to be able to perform a transaction with that kind of radius. You also have to pair it, right? Has anybody used a Bluetooth wireless headset or some device like that with their phone? Yeah, when you bought it, it didn't work. You had to go through a process to pair it to get permission to talk to another computer. In this case, your Bluetooth headset had to have permission to talk to your smartphone, and then it would work. So if you had to pair it every time you walked up to a cash register and go through that process, your transaction is going to take a lot longer. Then, of course, there's NFC. This obviously has a lot of merit. It's got a 5-inch radius, so it's only going to work to the register that's immediately in front of it. And it is not something that requires pairing. So that's why it's getting so much attention, and I think it's one of the ways that this command response dialog is really going to become ubiquitous at the register. These aren't the only things. There are a number of different options out there, but these are the ones to watch. When you look at Visa and some of their announcements, now Visa is playing this about as smart as any company could be performing in this space. They are, in my view, hedging. We don't know which technology is going to ultimately prevail. We don't know what model is ultimately going to prevail. Nobody knows for certain what products are going to be used 5 years from now. Nobody knows. So Visa is playing in every possible iteration, every possible type of product that might get traction over that period of time. They're trying them all. So whatever one wins, they're already going to have some experience with it. I think it's very smart if you got the capital, and they certainly do. But in one of their announcements, this was at the end of December of last year, they were talking specifically about an EMV chip talking to an NFC or using an NFC chip. NFC, for those of you who don't know, it's a radio. folks. It's really not that complicated a thing. In and of itself, it's not a secure way to transmit or information, or especially information like payments. EMV is a protocol that sits on top of that, and all EMV is a set of rules that it's actually a set of command response dialogues that will happen between a computer and another computer that will validate one computer on the other computer's network, right? So EMV requires a dialogue, NFC enables a dialogue, you put the two together and you've got a very potent technology. And there's one more missing piece to all this, which is the credentials, right? So the EMV products, you need to have your information. Who are you, right? Who is the person that is attached to the phone that's about to make this transaction? Well, this is the easy one, in my view, because we figured this out in telecom 20 years ago, all right? And it's called a kernel or credentials, right? Again, looking around this room, I think most of you are old enough to remember the cell phones that were out there in the 80s. Right, remember the very first ones? We called them the bricks. They were about this long, and they had a little antenna on top of them and that whole thing. And everybody was a little nervous about using them because it was very easy to listen in to your call. And it was even easier to steal your phone number, program it into another phone, and then call anywhere you like. So you had people getting phone bills for tens of thousands of dollars because somebody stole their number and programmed it into another phone. Everybody remember those? Back in the day, as we say. Does anybody in this room have an example of that in the last 10 years? A single example of a call being made fraudulently off of a cell phone? Not one, because we figured it out. Well, I didn't. But the GSMA figured it out, and it looks like this. I'm sorry, I said GSMA, CDMA. The different technologies within cell phones essentially use the same thing. They figured out that you just can't transmit the secret. You've got to have a secret code, and it's embedded in the phone, and it never gets transmitted off the phone. It's used instead to sort of solve problems, to answer questions back and forth. So every time you turn on your phone, this command response is happening between your phone and the network. And they're asking each other's questions. The network is challenging your phone with a series of questions. If your phone doesn't answer correctly, then it's not validated on that network and it doesn't work. Okay, so that's how it functions. So somebody said, well, if I can store one secret code on a mobile phone, maybe I can store a lot of them, or even more than one. It doesn't take that many. So that's where a trusted service manager comes in. So a trusted service manager is responsible for getting that code onto the phone. So the code from your mobile operator gets put on by your mobile operator. You ever notice when you're getting your mobile phone for the first time and you're standing there at the AT&T desk, they ask for your driver's license or some other form of ID. They ask for proof that you live where you live. They ask for a lot of things, not just for your credit, but also to ensure that there's a name and a face and a ID associated with the secret that's associated with the phone. Because now they're set if they have all those things. A trusted service manager does the exact same thing, or will, because this isn't something we use yet. But the idea is if you wanted to have a credit card or a merchant card or whatever protected by this kind of technology, you are, at the time that it's being set up, you're presenting your driver's license or a passport or what have you to make sure that there's a face and an ID and a copy of all those things associated with the secret that's associated with the phone. So now you've got a way to store the secret, you've got a way to do the command response, and you've got the protocol and EMV that will make it all work together. Again, is this the combination that's going to prevail? I don't know. I can't say that I know. But analyzing it and looking at the other products that are out there, it's got the best chance. So let's go back to what's going to make this work. So we've talked about security. We have talked about lowering costs. Let's talk about driving sales. Reward systems you've all heard of. Loyalty programs you've all heard of. They're not quite as stringently defined as I've defined them here, but this helps. Rewards programs are banks trying to get you to use their cards called top of wallet, right? They want you to pull out their Bank of America Visa card as opposed to pulling out a Chase Visa card. So to do that, they give you rewards or points or incentives or gifts or what have you. So when you reach into your wallet, you think, hey, I got this thing from Bank of America. I'm going to pull out their card instead of somebody else's. Reward programs. Loyalty programs, those are all the cards that you're accumulating points. Come to Home Depot to buy your toaster and don't go to Walmart because Home Depot will give you something that Walmart doesn't. Loyalty programs. Traditionally, they're built off of the side, if you will, off of acquiring processors. They're using that data to perform the functions of these products. right? So these are the Merits, companies like Merits, Carlson Marketing, Affinion. These are all the businesses that handle these loyalty types of programs. And they've been doing pretty well. That's America, 2.1 billion at the end of 2010. 2.1 billion different loyalty cards in the hands of Americans. That's an interesting number because there are only 300 million of us, including the kids, right? So that's for every man, woman, and child in the United States. There are over 7 different loyalty programs in their hands today. That's a lot. And I'm going to guess that we don't use them all. They're not all active accounts, but that's how many are out there. So again, you look at the scenario that's coming, right? On the one hand, this is actually 8. This is exactly what the typical profile is. These are all loyalty cards. You got 8 different loyalty cards from whoever in your wallet. Or you've got this choice of using a mobile phone. So first of all of your cards are right there. You can just flip right through them because you've got them on your phone. And the ability of the retailer to say, you know what? On October 10th, which is the date that happens to be up here, I want to give an additional $2 off of for new customers or customers using this technology because I want to drive business. So the time between Jamba Juice deciding they want to give away that $2 and the time that they can actually give away that $2 is minutes or seconds. In cards, they've got to either send you an email, have you received that email, and then you do something with that email, or they do something else to notify you that there's a $2 discount, and then they just hope that you come into their store. So you've got a lot more disconnects. When you put it on the phone, as soon as the customer walks in, or even if they don't see it, as soon as they pay with the phone can remember for you, and certainly the Google Wallet does. So if you've got a coupon that you're not using and you've signed up for that card, you can get that $2, whereas you wouldn't have been able to get it if you didn't remember it, even if you had a Jamba Juice card before. It's simply more convenient. Convenience drives customer support, and that's what mobile commerce is going to offer. Revenue. We're talking about sales. What else is going to drive revenue? What else is going to make this interesting for merchants and for consumers to adopt? 3.3% of Starbucks' fiscal year 2010 income, net income, came from this source. I can't imagine anybody in the room knows exactly what this is unless they've seen the slide before. This is actually breakage on their prepaid cards. Right? So when you walk into a Starbucks and you buy a card and you buy a $10 card and the last 56 cents are on it and you say, whatever, forget it, and you throw it away, that 56 cents doesn't mean much to you, but it means a heck of a lot to them. 3.3% of their net revenue. That's the total money they received minus the total cost of goods to sell those products. 3.3% of that number in 2010 was just from leftover money. 7.6% of one of the biggest big box retailers had their net income come from the exact same source. So it's really no surprise when you look at the Starbucks card that it's run exclusively off of a prepaid card. That's the only way the Starbucks card will work. You've got to buy a prepaid card first, and then you load it up into this thing. And now, is the breakage going to be the same on this? No, probably not, because you can reload it, and you're more likely to because it's one app that you'll always have. But still, it's revenue. If it's new revenue, it, again, has a higher degree or higher likelihood of getting adopted. Another interesting thing about this, you can reload that with cash. Okay, so if I walk into a Starbucks and I've got the phone on my card or the card in my hand, I can walk up to a Starbucks cashier with $20, hand them $20 in cash, and they can put $20 in cash onto my Starbucks card. Okay, that's pretty interesting if you think about it, because Starbucks can actually be a bank. If I only transacted at Starbucks and all I ever did was drink coffee, I didn't need any other goods and services whatsoever, why wouldn't I just get my paycheck right straight into my Starbucks card? Now, it's an absurd scenario, but it'll make a little bit more sense in a second. ISIS, we don't know if they're prepaid cards. They're going to have one, but we don't know if they're going to be able to reload it with cash. I kind of doubt it. And we know that the Google Wallet, you can't load it with cash yet, but I'm wondering if that's an opportunity to do it in the future. Here's why. This is M-Pesa, which is the incumbent, really the first mass-scale mobile payments product in the world. Operates out of Kenya, a company called Safaricom. Very, very interesting. What's happening at this transaction, this gentleman's obviously at a store of some kind, and he looks like he's buying a thing, and he's doing it with his phone. He's sending money from his account to the merchant so she can give him the bottle of soda that's behind her on the rack. That might be what's happening in the picture. The other thing that might be happening is the customer might be giving the cash to the cashier, and the cashier might be loading more points onto his, or more credits onto his phone. Okay, so this customer doesn't have to buy anything to do a transaction. He can walk into a store with his cash and put it on his phone. So the retail store is his bank, literally his bank. Now, in a place like Kenya, that obviously makes a big difference because most people don't have a bank account here. Not so in the US, but there's still enough of them driving that cash line. So look at what that did to their economy. The red line is all the transactions that happened on M-Pesa since it was basically made available to the general public back in 2006. The top line is how people used to pay. Now, this is not only transactions, this is also bills, utility bills, and other types of goods and services and debts that are being paid in the country of Kenya. The top two lines are cash lines. And as you can see, they've effectively been replaced by M-Pesa. Now, again, this is a cash-based society. Most people don't even have bank accounts. I think somewhere around 17% of the people in Kenya actually have a bank account. The rest do not. Again, not so in first world countries, but we saw this slide before. There's a reason our cash line has remained so stable in the low 20% all this time. Is it because that we simply didn't, that's the sum of all the $10, $5 transactions that we simply don't want to use a card for? Maybe. But that's also driven by the people that don't have credit cards and don't have bank accounts, that do all their transacting via cash. So is there an opportunity to penetrate that market in the United States? If, hypothetically, Google Wallet lets you reload their card at a retailer. The unbanked would have no reason to ever step foot in a bank. All they would do is take their cash, give it to a retailer, and that money gets loaded onto their card, and then they can do all kinds of things with it after that. And they're part of, the rest of the world. Pretty interesting. That's a body blow to the banking industry. Well, a body blow. We don't know how big that population is, but if you don't need a bank can't charge you as much for their goods and services, ultimately, over time. Sorry to the bankers in the room, but that's the core idea of it. So here are the models. Again, we don't know what it's going to look like, but it's either going to be, we're going to end up with a bunch of different apps. I'm not a big fan of this idea because, today we've got the big boxes have their own apps. I think it's very, very powerful and they're very, very convenient. But I'm not here to talk about the interim products. I'm here to talk about what this looks like in 5 years or 10 years. And in 5 years or 10 years, if you shop at 25 different retailers, are you going to have 25 different apps on your phone that you'll go through and choose every single time? Maybe. It's certainly possible, but it doesn't feel like a long-term solution. It feels like those will be integrated. And some proof of that is, Walmart and Target, for example, saying that they want to create a payment product of their own in some of the announcements that have come up in just the last few weeks. More likely they'll evolve into something that's a joint product. That's one product that can be used at multiple retailers. Maybe it's a Google Wallet or something like it. Maybe it's something different. Maybe it's ISIS. Maybe it's something we haven't seen yet. Who knows? Or maybe it's in the OS of the phone itself, which would allow for tender steering. So you're just basically putting everything right into the phone, which is certainly what Apple wants to see, giving the retailer a little more power and the consumer a little more power. We don't know. We don't know, but it's going to be certainly interesting to watch, and we certainly have a good argument for these types of things developing in the very near future. I have a question, my last question for the room. So we've talked about mobile commerce and its growth, and we talked about M-Pesa a little bit, and we talked about the incredible value of this stuff, and we talked about how it's going to break a very big $5.5 trillion model in some way. Break it, modify it, make it bigger, make it smaller, make it different. How much money is passing through mobile commerce systems around the world today in total, in dollars, US dollars? Anybody know? How about transactions? How many transactions are happening in mobile commerce? How many coupons are being redeemed in mobile commerce around the world? Nobody knows? I don't know either, right? Because that information isn't being collected yet. This is something we did for the telecommunications business. We took all their proprietary data, they send it to our group every month, and we index it and send it back. So when they send, this happens to be for international long distance, which was part of what our group does. So we'll send them back the industry high for a given data point, the industry average, and the industry low, and then we'll say, your position is right here. Very valuable information. We're not giving them their competitors' data, but we're telling them exactly where they sit in a business. This is how they run their international long distance businesses today. because they know exactly how they're doing. If they've got a country manager responsible for building market share in a given country, this is how they tell them, is that market share growing or is it decreasing, right? But that's only possible because we've got 70% of every minute of traffic that crosses a border in our system that we can use to create this industry profile. But it doesn't exist for mobile commerce, not yet anyway. We're actually announcing today that we're going to build the same thing for mobile commerce, right? So all of the mobile commerce players in the world will be able to see what their growth is, what their transactions are in terms of dollars, how their transactions stack up against the industry averages, what's the average dollar volume, for example, of their transactions, what's their average number of transactions that are being affected by something else, like a coupon or something else. All of that information, both at the industrial level and at their level, will be communicated back to them. We're probably going to set the minimum at about 5,000 transactions a month. In the case of telecom, the minimum was 1 billion minutes a month. Nobody in mobile commerce has that kind of volume yet. We've got, I think M-Pesa just passed its $1.5 trillion of funds being transited. But other than that, the players aren't that big yet in mobile commerce. They're going to be, but they're not yet. So it's a closed user group, by the way, so all this information stays within the group except for the top line numbers, just like we do with GW Tracker. But, so we're announcing that today. Our press release is probably going to be coming out pretty soon. But finally, we're going to have a way to look at this entire industry, see how big it is, see how well it's penetrating into the payment space, and see where it's going. So we're very excited about that. Thank you very much for your time. My name is David Schropfer. That's my book, The Smartphone Wallet, and my the white paper that Gary is giving away. 2 of those, Google Wallet and the new payments ecosystem. So thank you very much for your time. And
thank you, David.